Once hailed as one of the greatest actors of his generation, Dustin Hoffman built a career on roles that redefined what it meant to be human. Vulnerable, flawed, brilliant. His performances were more than just entertainment. They were revelations.
He gave voice to the outsider, the misunderstood, the invisible man screaming behind a quiet face. But now, at 88 years old, the applause has long faded.
And what remains is a story no one wants to tell. The heartbreaking downfall of a man once adored by millions. Behind the curtain of Oscars and standing ovations lies a tragic portrait of strained relationships, vanished opportunities, and a reputation forever altered by scandal and silence. Once welcomed on every red carpet and late-night couch, Hoffman today is a ghost of the industry he helped define. Friends have disappeared, the spotlight has dimmed, and the man who once transformed cinema now walks in the shadows of what could have been. This isn't just a story about aging, it's about exile, about how Hollywood, with its short memory and ruthless speed, can turn its back on even its most loyal icons. It's about choices, consequences, and the quiet agony of watching the world move on without you. In this documentary, we uncover the truth behind Dustin Hoffman's heartbreaking final chapter, the roles lost, the relationships strained, the controversies that silenced his legacy, and the loneliness that now surrounds a man who once moved millions with a whisper. This is the tragedy of Dustin Hoffman. Before the tragedy, there was the miracle. Dustin Hoffman didn't just arrive in Hollywood, he disrupted it. In an era of polished leading men with sculpted jaws and polished smiles, Hoffman burst through the screen with something far more dangerous: truth. When The Graduate premiered in 1967, it was more than a hit. It was a cultural reset. Here was a short, awkward, neurotic young man cast not as comic relief, but as the lead, and suddenly audiences saw themselves. Hoffman shattered every conventional rule of what a star should look like, and in doing so, he changed the very DNA of American cinema. Directors took notice, studios took chances, the anti-hero was born, and Hoffman became its most honest messenger. His next performances, Midnight Cowboy, Lenny, Kramer vs. Kramer, Tootsie, Rain Man, weren't just acclaimed, they were seismic. He wasn't acting, he was becoming. Whether it was a struggling father, a misunderstood genius, or a man lost, in his own disguise, Hoffman had an uncanny ability to disappear into the role while somehow exposing his truest self. His intensity was legendary. He famously stayed in character off camera, pushed directors to the brink, and obsessed over every detail. He was difficult, no doubt, but he was also brilliant. Colleagues whispered about how draining it was to work with him, but they also admitted he forced them to be better. Hoffman wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing truth. And for decades, it worked. Awards piled up. Applause never seemed to end. But beneath it all, beneath the accolades and standing ovations, something was quietly building, a storm. Hoffman's refusal to play the Hollywood game, his deep discomfort with celebrity, and his fierce need for control began to isolate him. He turned down roles that others begged for. He disappeared for years between films. And slowly, the myth of Hoffman the artist began to eclipse Hoffman the man. Friends noticed, collaborators noticed. So did casting agents. While the world revered him, Hoffman retreated further inward. He hated interviews, loathed red carpets, rejected the PR machine that Hollywood demanded. What he didn't know was that the industry would soon demand even more, and those who resisted would be punished, forgotten, or worse, discarded. By the early 2000s, a new Hollywood was emerging, one driven by youth, speed, and submission to the system, and Hoffman, once its most daring rebel, now felt increasingly out of place. He had built a career on being impossible to ignore, but now, in the very industry he helped revolutionize, Dustin Hoffman was slowly becoming invisible. And the tragic part? He didn't even see it happening. Not yet. Not until the calls stopped coming. For decades, Dustin Hoffman was revered as a master of his craft, complex, intense, even difficult, but always respected. Then came the allegations. In 2017, as the Not Me Too movement swept through Hollywood like a long overdue reckoning, Hoffman's name was suddenly on everyone's lips, not for his performances, but for accusations that dated back decades. Several women came forward, detailing inappropriate comments, unwanted advances, and behavior that, by today's standards, was deeply troubling. Some incidents going as far back as the 80s. The public, once enamored with the actor's brilliance, now faced a painful question. What do we do when our heroes aren't heroic? Hoffman denied the accusations, insisting he didn't remember the events the way they were described. He didn't yell, didn't attack his accusers, he simply faded. No interviews, no emotional press conferences, no carefully worded apologies, or image-saving PR moves, just silence, and that silence spoke volumes. In an age where every celebrity was forced to reckon with their past, Hoffman's refusal to step forward or fully confront the claims made him appear guilty to some, indifferent to others. Overnight, the tone around him changed. Once a living legend, he became a pariah. Whispers at industry events, erased invitations, projects that suddenly vanished from schedules. Roles dried up, collaborators distanced themselves. Even his most devoted fans struggled to reconcile the man they admired with the stories they were now hearing. The tragedy wasn't just in the accusations. It was in the erasure. A man who had once redefined acting was now written out of the conversation altogether. And perhaps, most painful of all, Hoffman, so protective of his legacy, could do nothing to stop it. He didn't sue. He didn't fight. He simply stepped back, watching as the empire he built slowly crumbled around him. If you're moved by the dumb, hidden stories of Hollywood's fallen legends, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment with who you'd like us to cover next. There's more beneath the surface than you think. Hoffman's story became a cautionary tale, not just of accountability, but of silence. For a man who made his career by saying what no one else would say, by expressing vulnerability, rage, fear, and heartbreak on screen, it was jarring that, when it mattered most, he said almost nothing at all. The industry didn't need a conviction. In the era of moral rebranding, perception was punishment enough. And so, like many others of his generation, Hoffman found himself standing alone, neither defended nor forgiven, just forgotten. And in that forgetting, in that slow, unceremonious vanishing, lay the deepest cut of all. Not the scandal, not the shame, but the silence that followed. A silence so deafening, even Dustin Hoffman couldn't act his way out of it. Dustin Hoffman's brilliance on screen always came with a price, but by the time he reached his late 80s, that price had become painfully clear. The man who could inhabit every role with unparalleled depth, who could make audiences laugh, cry, and gasp, now found himself increasingly isolated. Colleagues who once lined up to work with him were few and far between. Directors who had once fought for his involvement were hesitant, citing both age and controversy. Even longtime friends, uncomfortable with the ongoing scrutiny, began to drift away. The once crowded world of Hollywood had quietly emptied around him. Hoffman's own family relationships, strained over years of intense focus on craft and public image, now demanded his attention in ways he could no longer ignore. The dual pressures of legacy and aging collided. An actor who had spent a lifetime portraying human fragility was now confronting it in himself. His days were no longer filled with rehearsal rooms, cameras, and accolades, but with the quiet hum of memory, reflection, and regret. The homes he stayed in were filled with remnants of his extraordinary career, awards, scripts, photos, and letters that once brought joy, but now served as bittersweet reminders of both success and solitude. Mentally, Hoffman wrestled with a paradox. A public persona immortalized on screen, yet a personal life increasingly unanchored. Sleep came in fragments. Days blurred together, and the once vivid applause of audiences seemed like a distant echo. Those who tried to reach out often found a man cautious and defensive, not angry, but wary. To Dustin, the outside world had grown treacherous, unpredictable, and at times, unforgiving. He had seen how easily admiration could turn into judgment, how the smallest misstep could overshadow decades of excellence. And so he withdrew further, choosing controlled interactions, selective engagements, and long hours alone. Yet even in isolation, Hoffman's mind remained alert, sharp, and filled with creativity. He continued to study scripts privately, imagining roles that would never be realized, scenes that would never be filmed. His talent, undiminished, existed in a realm invisible to most, alive, simmering, and unspoken. This tension, between an inner life still vibrant and an outer world increasingly distant, created a tragedy more profound than any scandal or criticism. It was the slow unraveling of a man whose art once connected millions, now left to navigate the emotional labyrinth of aging, fading fame, and solitude. Hoffman's brilliance had always been accompanied by intensity, but now that intensity was coupled with quiet desperation, an ache for connection that the world, distracted and impatient, seemed unwilling to provide. And as the years passed, the contrast grew starker. The images of youthful vigor on screen versus the lived reality of a man facing the twilight of his life, still brilliant, still haunted, but profoundly, heartbreakingly alone. As Dustin Hoffman approaches the twilight of his life, the question remains, what will endure beyond the controversies, the silence, and the heartbreak? His performances are immortal, etched into the fabric of cinema, yet the man himself has become a cautionary tale about fame, vulnerability, and the fleeting nature of adoration. Colleagues, critics, and fans alike continue to debate the paradox of Hoffman, the actor who could illuminate the human soul on screen, yet struggled to navigate the same emotions in real life. The layers of his brilliance were mirrored by layers of isolation, moments of self-doubt, and the relentless scrutiny of an unforgiving public. As his health and energy decline, the stark contrast between the icon he once was and the man he has becomes painfully apparent. Friends recount stories of a man who, despite his legendary talent, longed for genuine connection, yet often pushed people away, either through miscommunication, misunderstanding, or the very intensity that made him extraordinary on screen. The roles that made him famous, the struggling dreamer, the tortured genius, the conflicted everyman, now serve as mirrors reflecting his own struggles with aging, legacy, and relevance. Hollywood, with its insatiable appetite for the new and the scandalous, has turned away from him, leaving a space once filled with admiration, now eerily silent. And yet, even in that silence, Dustin Hoffman's influence persists. Actors study his performances, directors reference his meticulous preparation, critics cite his instinctual understanding of human behavior. The tragedy lies not in the loss of talent, for that remains untouchable, but in the man himself, who must now reconcile his immense cultural impact with the loneliness and diminished opportunities that accompany the end of a career. In interviews with those who knew him best, a portrait emerges of a man both brilliant and broken, a genius whose artistry demanded everything of him, and who, in turn, received the harsh realities of fame, betrayal, misjudgment, and a society quick to forget even its greatest luminaries. And so, as the lights dim on a life spent transforming cinema, Dustin Hoffman's story stands as a solemn reminder that genius, no matter how luminous, cannot shield one from the profound human need for connection, understanding, and compassion. His legacy is undeniable, his films timeless. But behind the accolades and applause lies a man who, for all his accomplishments, has faced heartbreak that no script could ever fully capture. In the end, the tragedy of Dustin Hoffman is not just the fading of a star, it is the silent cost of brilliance, the unseen toll of a life lived in the pursuit of perfection, and the heartbreaking reality that sometimes, Even legends are left alone in the shadows of their own greatness.